Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of Motivation and Money with me, Mark Terrell, and my co-host Fanny Snaith. How are you, Fanny?
I am excellent, thank you very much.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
As
So
ever.
today we're going to be talking about stories. It seems to be coming up a lot in my world at the moment. I'm reading a book at the moment called Story Worthy. I'll share a little bit about what I've learned from that. There's other books around stories that I'm sure we've all read. So if you have anything about your story without regards to your business, life, what your story has led you to do, I would be really interested to hear about it. We're going to be talking about our stories. Well, I am. Hopefully, Fanny, are you okay to talk about your story? Yeah.
Um,
So we'll talk about our stories and see where it takes us. So there we are.
can I do a shout out for a book?
Yeah, go for it, Fanny.
Um, because I think what we're sort of saying is the importance of the stories in our business, right? And there's a wonderful book by a lady called Susan Payton,
Hmm.
and it's called The Business of Stories. And it's actually been an Amazon #1 bestseller for a long time, and it's hopefully going to be shortlisted for the Business Book Awards tomorrow as well.
That's right. I saw her last night on a webinar. She was telling a story about other things
Oh,
that
did
happened in
you?
her life. Yeah,
Oh yeah. Oh, she's such a lovely lady. I know Susan. She's very. I didn't know she had a webinar.
it wasn't hers. It was somebody else's. That she was one of the sort of contributors, I suppose, sharing her story about what
Oh,
she did because she's got a really interesting backstory with regards to working with people like Chris Tarrant
good.
and things. So she
Yeah,
was talking
yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
that and some things that happened in her previous life that were, yes, not very helpful, but she got over them and, yeah, interesting.
There you
So
go.
there
You
we
see,
are. So stories are really important.
the point of
Hmm.
that is right. Just at the beginning of our conversation. Sorry, I don't mean to wave my pen at you. Is look how much you remember from last night.
Well, that is the thing that I was talking about. We were in a networking meeting this morning, and my one-to-one with somebody, and we talked about that and how, marketing and PR and all that sort of stuff is linked to being relatable by telling a story. Then it all
Hmm.
makes sense once you tell a story, as opposed to just giving people facts and figures and what have you, and theories. It's always answering the so what. So what? How
Yeah,
come that's important to me? So the way you can do that is by putting it into context by telling a story. So that's why it's important. And there's obviously more to it than that. But so is there anything you want to kick off or do you want me to kick off?
the
I'll
floor is
go first
yours.
then. Okay, so I thought this one of the things that I think is important is realizing, and I think Susan talks about it in her book, is we all have our stories, but obviously that doesn't mean that we are projecting our stories onto our clients. It's about understanding what their story is, understanding what ours is, and sort of using that information to help um, to overcome challenges and problems. So my business, the Reluctant Leader Academy in particular, is very much focused around what I experienced in my retail business. So that I joined that business from school, and most of the time I enjoyed that journey. My motivations were generally quite high, but what I realised after I sold that business was that the latter years weren't particularly motivational for me. And the reason why was that I ended up doing a lot of things that I didn't really want to do with regards to motivational wise. I could do them, I had the skills to do them, but I didn't really get energy from these things, you see. So,
I didn't know that about you. So after you
yeah,
sold the business,
yeah,
that's after you sold the business.
hmm,
What
yeah.
did you do? What did you do?
Didn't really know
Am I allowed
quite
to
what to
ask
do.
questions?
You can ask me whatever you like, yeah. I don't have to answer them, do I?
No. What did you
So,
do?
so yeah, so the business wasn't for sale. We had the opportunity to sell that business, and to cut a long story short, we didn't take initially. We've actually said no, it's not for sale because we weren't actually. It wasn't for sale, But then, as 6 months or so later, when they came back, we actually realised that actually it was quite a good time. For me, I was actually thinking, well, I'd really like to be able to do something else. My mum was involved in the business, and retirement was sort of a good idea for her. So it all seemed to, and then obviously we had to go through the process of selling, which takes quite a while with due diligence and stuff with a large organisation. But we went through it and got through it. But I wasn't prepared. That was the important thing. Although I did meet someone in that period of 6 months who helped me with regards to what she said to me, and I didn't realise at the time, was that there's an emotional attachment to your business that you won't realise at the moment. But when you're going through the process of selling something that you've been attached to for 30 years, it is an emotional thing, and lots of emotions to come up. And she said, I'll help you through it. So that's what I did. That was the first time I ever had a coach. And she helped me through the mindset of selling my business. What was I going to do next? And she was one of the people that said, well, you got all that experience, then why don't you become a coach of some sort? So that's the selling of the business, and then the next story as well, the business I then created with regard around that in my coaching business is connected. But now the next step in that my story is then writing my book, and what that brings up is all sorts of things around, well, what do I put in the book? What's relevant? What's not? And then it really focuses your mind on, well, actually, even though it's a business book, there's a storyline through it. And obviously I bring in certain bits about my own journey and story in that. So it's, and I've got a theory. I don't think it's more than a theory. I think pretty much everybody that is doing coaching of some sort is solving a problem that they once had. Would you agree?
Teach what you need to learn, right?
Yeah.
Teach what you need or what you needed to learn.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's why in pretty much all instances with regards to someone that's coaching something, there's a pretty important story behind what they're doing, because they've had adversity, they've overcome it in some way. I think, right, I want to help those people so they don't make the same mistakes as I made. Yeah.
Cool.
So there's an overview of sort of my story and how it sort of knits in together with what I do now, and it's constantly evolving. That's the point, isn't it?
So are you saying then, after you sold the business and you started thinking about becoming a coach, your motivation wasn't particularly high at that time?
My motivation was always quite high, because I always was sort of positive in regards to motivation. So there is the thing about, you have to take responsibility for your motivation. So I wasn't a low ebb as such, but I realised that my performance wasn't as high as it should be because I was lacking things in my business. And so, interestingly, I've also got the motivational maps that I've done over that period. I've done over 6 or 7 years. I've probably done 6 or 7 maps, to be honest. It's about an average of one a year. And the first map I had when I left that retail business, it had friend, which is the motivation for belonging, in my top 3. I can always remember that. And now it doesn't appear. It's always in my bottom 3. So in that time, belonging was really important to me. So I wanted to find somewhere where I belong. I didn't obviously feel that I belonged in that, the retail environment. Obviously, I'd sort of fallen out of love with it. So I was looking for some sort of belonging. And so that drove me to find my place within the Motivational Maps community, Liberating Leadership community, and all that sort of stuff, which is important. I think when you're coaching, you need to have people around you that are like-minded, kind of support you. I've been on the journey. Maybe they're a few steps ahead of you, so you can learn from them.
And I think, I think that's a really important point, because I think that particular part of the journey, few of us talk about. But I've noticed that when I have conversations like one-to-ones with people, that part of the journey is probably the most useful. So for instance, I was talking to a coach in a networking group, and she's not been coaching for as long as I have, and left the job, and then decided to become self-employed. And it was when I started talking about how all of a sudden you lose the umbrella of the firm that you're working for. And for instance, for me, I was Fanny Snaith working for the Digital Workplace Group, rolled off the tongue of Butte, beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it was like, hi, my name's Fanny Snaith, I'm a certified money coach, and you'd sink down, because it would be like, okay, so I've gone and done all this training on becoming a certified money coach. I know how to manage my money. I've built wealth. I've done all these things. So why do I feel so exposed and so vulnerable? Why do I feel so small? And why do I feel so almost useless, actually? And that's when I talk about that part of my story. That's when I see coaches going, yes, I feel like that too. I feel like I'm coming from there. And then, it's interesting, because for me, on that part of my story, cementing it when you haven't got any customers because you don't know how to market yourself, you haven't got the money coming in that you even had from the day job, and the whole point was that you were giving it up so that you could earn a little bit more and have a bit more freedom, and you're a money coach.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
like, and if you're a woman and you just turned 50 and you're starting to get to that time of life, honestly, you're ending up in a absolute bubble of hot mess horribleness.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it? And yet
It is.
we have this wonderful story prior to that, like you talking about your retail business and all that kind of stuff. And then we sort of seem to stop it there and then pick it up when we've got a little bit more successful. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is interesting, and because I'm sure, like I do, that our biggest learnings come from what would be perceived as our failures, and actually what they are is really learning experiences, and you can't underestimate the importance of those learnings, because you've got to live them in many respects.
Exactly.
And the lived experience of something is really powerful, and because you can empathize, you've been there. It's why, in my world, I come across a lot of people that have trained to be business coaches. Now, obviously, they've trained and they've got some skills and they've got a toolkit and all that sort of stuff, which is fine. But unless they've run a business and they know what it's like to employ people and all those other things, and have the responsibility to, the financial responsibility and the day-to-day, and having to be there and having to, drop everything when staff don't turn up and all those sort of things, you can't really empathize 100% unless you've really sort of walked the talk, walked that path.
No, I know. I mean, I think I agree with you, and actually, when I think about my experience going back, I forget about those things, because when I think about my, I sort of go, well, how can I ever be a business coach, because it's just me in this business. But I forget that I have run the accounts, been the accountant for a company. I've been operations director for a company. I've been a manager of having 45 staff on site, 400 staff on the books. You might not have done all of those things all at the same time, but you've always had to go put different hats on and do those different parts of the job. But I agree with you. I think that, I agree with you. There are, you can go and learn things out of a textbook, but unless you've actually got the experience, it's just not going to happen.
So what part of your journey led you down to specifically wanting to be a money coach then, do you think?
I don't think I ever wanted to be a money coach at first, because I didn't even know what one was. So the famous story of mine was that I came from a really rocky childhood. So mum was married and divorced 3 times by the time I was 12. And each one of those marriages was really all leaning into money. It was all about money. So mum inherited her wealth when just before I was born, and wanted to just splash the cash, basically. And my dad didn't want to. He was like, used to write everything down, noted everything down, who spent what. So that was the end of that marriage, really. Then mum married another guy who wasn't particularly nice. So at 7, she packed my sister and I off to boarding school. And I arrived at boarding school knowing that I came from a wealthy family. But from the minute that I stepped over that threshold into the boarding school, I became the pauper, because there were, I don't know, famous people's children at the boarding school, really. And it was obvious that they had an awful lot more money than we did. And I was the youngest boarder, and it was quite hard. And I had to sort of stack, my self-worth took a bit of a knock, my self-esteem, and I had to be strong with that. I did 3 years there. Mum, in the meantime, was on to husband number 3 back home, and she actually married her bank manager, and sent us a letter saying that she'd met this guy and she was going to marry him. We better come home and meet him. Went home, got married. But literally less than a year into the marriage, he got blackmailed, and he gave basically all our money away, and his mother's money away. I won't go into too much about that story because it's a public place. And we came out of boarding school very swiftly, because obviously you couldn't pay the fees, and joined the local comprehensive school. I effectively missed a year of school because my mum didn't want me to go to the local primary school for a year. And so I started in the first year, as we called it then. I was the youngest person in the first year. And I remember standing in the free school meals queue. So it was very different from being at a very posh boarding school. Free school meals queue with everybody looking at me, thinking that I was the posh kid because I spoke nicely, but we didn't have a bean. And I just vowed that I would become a millionaire, and that I was going to be I was not going to be relied upon. I wasn't going to rely on anyone for money when I grew up. And that was sort of like the goal, the goal I set in my mind, even though I didn't really know what it meant or how to do it. So I just that was always running in the background through all the jobs that I did. I worked in television, market research, corporate events, all that kind of stuff. It was good fun. And then had my 2 gorgeous daughters, and decided I wanted to be at home for them. And so started working for the Digital Workplace Group, which was wonderful. Loved working there, got so much good experience. 13 years. And then I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I need to do something else. And I actually went to see the dream job coach, Louise Jenner. You ever met her? Oh, very nice lady.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I think I'm
nice.
connected on LinkedIn with her. I think we should give her a shout out.
We should give her a shout out in the video. Went to see her, and we talked about what I like doing. And she said, well, why don't you become a money coach? And I was like, is there such thing? Yep. So did that. So I showed people how to do their own personal bookkeeping. And people came along and saw me, and I shared my brilliant spreadsheets with them, my money map, as I call it, and people weren't interested. And I couldn't understand why. I was thinking, well, I'm trying to teach you how to manage your money here. People say they want financial literacy. You're not listening. And it was then I realised that these people were able to manage millions of pounds in budgets at work and not control their delivery wasn't around them, but control their spending or want to. So I went off and did my training at the Money Coaching Institute in America, and spent a year there learning about individual money coaching, couples money coaching, and business archetype coaching, which is actually really interesting. And then at that point, this was the crux, right? At that point, I realized how awful my relationship with money was.
Wow.
It was because all the money that I was collecting, my £1 million that I was bringing into my life, so I could be free. Well, so I could not be free, but I could be free from being broke.
Yeah.
So away from motivation rather than towards.
Yeah.
Just made me feel, oh my gosh, my relationship with money is just hideous. So that was a whole new journey for me. And then going through things in childhood and all that. So I started to understand and sympathize with how people think and feel about money way more than a lot of other people, I think, and here I am. And then started to help people with that, thinking, gosh, this is good. And it all went a bit too far the other way, and the fact that people were disclosing all sorts of stuff to me. So now I'm training to become, and nearly am trained to become, a cognitive hypnotherapist.
That's interesting, isn't it? We're all on that extra journey, and you know what comes next. And obviously, next journey is introducing that into your offer, which
But exactly. But the thing is, I think if I was to pinpoint part of the story that that feels the most painful now,
mm,
is the story of me becoming my early years of becoming a coach, because I felt completely useless,
mhm,
lost all my confidence, and I know that there are many people out there who feel the same way.
yeah. It's so interesting because what I'm thinking about now is, I mean, I've trained to become a liberating leadership coach, um, and one of the things I've learned from that is a very personal thing. It's not anything what I would have assumed or connected with leadership as such.
Yeah.
But what I realised was that to get in most instances, what you need is a balance of challenge and support.
Hmm.
Because if you just give someone support and you don't expect anything from them, what's going to happen is that they're just going to become more and more dependent on you. And there are people that actually live in that way, that they want to make people dependent on them. That's one of their mindsets. They want people to be dependent on this pipe, you know. But I was very much supportive in the respect that if I was supportive enough and gave everybody enough support, then it would eventually come back to me. It's almost like this reciprocation thing. But now I realise that that is not the case. That tends not to happen. What you need to do is that you need a balance. You need to be a balance with regards to the support you give someone and the challenge. And when you can give those in equal balance, in equal measures, so you're giving equal amounts of support and challenge, that's when you get probably the best results. You get respect, you get all the things that you probably want coming back to you, because you're not being that pushover. You've got expectations from that person. And so when there's expectations, they can only ever either live up to them or not. And when people don't live up to your expectations, that tends to be there's a reason behind it. And so from that
Are you
program,
talking about with clients? Are you talking about with clients?
in well, not just clients, it's all sorts of relationships. If you think about it, when you what's that what if you describe the best type of friend, are they the sort of people that just there for you all the time and they just sort of help
No.
you when you need it, or are is a good friend someone who would say, look, Fanny, I will help you this time, but for God's sake, you don't. If you carry on doing this, you're just going to get more and more of these problems coming up. I suggest you start doing this, and I don't mind you help, and I'll be there for you, but I think you should start changing the way you do things. And so that's
Mm,
been introducing that challenge, and I
yeah.
believe that being a friend is to be equally challenging and supportive.
Well, that's about being honest, isn't it?
Yeah, and genuine, being
Honest
genuine.
and
That's
genuine. And it's interesting because one of my very good friends, Tara Halliday, she also needs a shout out. Um, I think we've both done that to each other over the last year or so, where we've challenged each other. Like I remember me doing something with Ren, and I won't go into the story, but I was flying off out of the office instead of meeting her to go and rescue Ren from Bristol Airport. And she
mhm.
said, "Why can't Ren catch the bus?" And I was going, "Well, no." And she said, "You asked me to tell you if ever you thought that you were enabling your children, or
Yeah,
you were not teaching them right. This is the time.
yeah, yeah,
I'm telling you now
yeah.
that this is the time." And I was like, "Cool, great, yeah, you're right." I still went, but but I know
That's a great example. Being too supportive. So so
exactly.
what if you carry on doing that every time? She would expect you to drop everything and go and collect her. Whereas if you say, "Well, is there any reason why you can't get the bus?" And if you can't come up with a good reason, then get the bus because I'm going to I'm going to let somebody down here if I have to go and
No.
do this.
We
So
we actually went halfway. I actually got Ren to get the bus from the airport to Bristol Temple Meads, and then I picked her up from Bristol Temple Meads.
compromise, yeah.
Well,
No,
she
but
was very,
that's a great example, because we can all get traps
isn't it?
or fall into that trap of being that, drop everything, I'll help you out. But then, I
That's
suppose the
it.
question is, will they do the same for you? And
Mm,
they probably would at some point,
yeah.
but
And
it's
I remember another friend of mine years ago, and she just used to go, Fanny, you just don't need to try so hard. I was like, and it was like somebody put a
yeah,
dart
yeah,
in my eyeballs, and I took it as, first of all, I took it as such a criticism.
right, yeah,
But actually, do you know, when you think about it, they're just doing you a favour.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. But and that's the power of good quality feedback, and that's when you
Yeah,
get feedback from people that you trust. They're telling
yeah,
you what you need to know, not from
yeah,
any other than that it's for your good, and not it's not sort of they're not having some sort of gain from it. They're just saying to
yeah,
you, I need to tell you something, because if you carry on
yeah,
the way you're doing this, I don't think it's going to serve you very well. So, and we all
yeah.
need it. We need that feedback.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
So
No, it's really
yeah, so
interesting.
it's interesting how we talked. We always go on a little bit sidetracked, but stories are important, and we go on this journey, which is obviously the story of our
Well,
journey is
yeah.
relevant in many respects.
But also, I think, when you talk about that bit that you were talking about then, it's about actually fessing up to our vulnerability as well.
Hmm.
Because to be honest, and when I was talking about those early years when I was like, okay, so I'm sitting here, I haven't got any customers, I'm a money coach, and like this is me being totally inadequate. One of the big mistakes that I made is I didn't go and talk to anyone. I just
Mm,
sat there struggling with it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, what's all that about? Whereas if you've got where you have got support,
Mm,
where you have got people that you can talk to, people go, well, just because you, and actually somebody said to me that, they said, just because you're a money coach and you're good with money doesn't mean to say that you're good at earning money from your own business, because you don't know what the hell you're doing with the marketing
mm,
and sales, because you've never
yeah,
had to do that before.
yeah.
And that's fine.
And that's the story that most coaches have been on. I bet you
It's,
everyone can have
isn't it?
some similar story where they just think,
Or feel
well,
a
actually, I've got
video
all this
coming on.
expertise. I want to help people. I want to make a difference, but I just don't know how to connect with those clients.
Yeah.
So
Feel a
yeah,
video coming on. I'm a business coach that doesn't know how to get business.
yeah. What does that say?
Actually,
Go
though,
on.
that poses the question, though. I always think it's interesting. What about a sales coach that hasn't got any customers?
There's
That's
always an
always an
interesting thing though. When you see, I always ask the question when there's a sales coach in like a networking meeting. So if you're so great at sales, then how come you have to go to a networking event? It's just one of those things that makes me chuckle. I'm not. I know there's it's not as
Mm.
simple as that, but it does make you wonder, doesn't it? If that person is so good at sales, surely they'd be just selling all the time somewhere. Well, maybe
Well,
they
they
are,
have
I
to
suppose, in
find,
that networking group. I
well,
don't
they have to find the people to sell to.
know. Yeah,
And it's not a never-ending long queue of people outside the door. You've got to go to
no, that's
networking
true.
to meet different places. So we can do that.
Yeah,
But gosh, that must be, can you imagine? That must be really tough if you're a salesperson, you can't find customers. That must be awful. Oh my
yeah,
God,
yeah.
really my heart's just gone like a little like pounding as of sympathy.
Yeah, yeah, it is hard. Yeah, no. Anyway, we're at that magic moment now where we've
Aren't
gone
we?
30 minutes and we need to wrap things up.
Quickest
So
30 minutes.
as always, it's flown by.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we should always connect to our stories and how it helps us, and also how it may be holding us back with regards to our beliefs and the things that we can do and can't do. So it's really relevant to check in with it now and again. Um, and I hope if you're listening to our conversation, you've got some value from it. And if you would like to share anything that you have learned or anything about your own story, that will be lovely. We will find that and reply if you leave any comments wherever you might catch this on the interweb or on social media. So, any final words, Fanny, before we hang up?
Yeah, write your story. Write your money story for a start.
Hmm?
Because part of the big work that I do is all about your money story. so you can sift out those negative and unhelpful beliefs and thoughts that don't serve you anymore. So for your story is important, but it's
Just
not about living there.
use it for the benefit of it, but don't let it
Use it for
hold
the
you back.
benefit.
Indeed, that's a
Oh,
good place to leave it. So thanks again, Fanny. Really enjoyed it, and we will see you again very soon next time.